woman behind the legend in the reality of the shadows. For over 40 years, she was the quiet strength behind the legend. While the world danced to One Love and No Woman, No Cry, Rita Marley lived a reality that few could imagine. A reality forged in betrayal, devotion, bullets, and faith. Now at her age, she has decided to no longer remain silent. How does one survive an assassination attempt only to perform on stage 2 days later? What does it mean to prepare breakfast for your husband and his mistress under the same roof? And how do you carry the weight of a legacy that was never truly yours, yet always rested on your shoulders? In this video, we reveal what Rita has finally disclosed and why her story changes everything we thought we knew about the Marleys, the woman behind the legend. Long before the world knew Bob Marley as a global icon, before the dreadlocks and the anthems of peace and resistance, he was just a young man from Trenchtown, Jamaica, with a guitar and a message. And by his side, often in the shadows but always at the heart of his story, was Rita Marley. She was his partner in music, in faith, in trials, and in life. Early connections in the spiritual path at Studio One. Their paths crossed in the heat and rhythm of Studio One, the legendary recording studio in Kingston. Rita, then a member of the female group The Soleils, was mentored by a calm but determined Bob Marley. He wasn't very direct with his words, preferring to send friends to express his interest, but their connection quickly intensified. Rita, already a mother to a little girl named Sharon, saw something authentic in Bob. In return, Bob welcomed Sharon as his own daughter, a first step toward building the family that would become the core of their lives. On February 10th, they married. Rita was 19, and Bob had just turned 21. That same year, a transformative event took place, affecting not only their relationship, but their spiritual path. While Bob was in Delaware with his mother trying to provide for their needs, Rita was in Jamaica during the visit of Emperor Haile Selassie. When he passed by her, Rita swore she saw nail marks in his hands. For her, this moment sealed a deep, lifelong devotion to Rastafarianism. It was a faith that she eventually passed on to Bob, forever changing his worldview and his art. A unique partnership amidst political violence. Together, they formed a unique partnership. Professionally, Rita supported Bob as a member of the I3s, the trio of powerful female vocalists who brought richness and soul to the sound of the Wailers. On a personal level, she was his anchor through poverty, political violence, and relentless tours. Their bond was not conventional, but it was undeniable. They founded a family consisting of 3 biological children, Sidella, Ziggy, and Stephen, as well as children they adopted or had from previous and outside relationships. Their home, far from traditional, was filled with music, movement, and meaning. In the 1970s, political tensions in Jamaica reached their peak. Rival factions turned the streets of Kingston into a war zone, and Bob Marley, having become a cultural hero, was both a target and a symbol. The moment that almost broke everything occurred on December 3, 1976, a few days before the Smile Jamaica concert, a free event intended to calm national tensions. That evening, gunmen stormed the Marley house on Hope Road. Rita was wounded by a bullet to the head. Bob took 2 bullets. Their manager was seriously injured. Incredibly, Bob and Rita survived, and barely 48 hours later, her head bandaged with dried blood still in her dreadlocks, Rita stood on stage alongside Bob in Kingston. Her presence was an act of defiance, her survival a protest. Exile in London and the evolution of a marriage. Bob, with his arms raised despite his injuries, delivered one of the most iconic performances in reggae history, proving that music could hold its ground where politics and bullets failed. Subsequently, Bob went into exile in London for his safety, where he finished Exodus, the album that Time magazine would later name the best of the 20th century. Rita joined him not only as a wife, but also as a creative partner, providing her voice and support as he poured his soul into the music. Their marriage evolved into something more spiritual than romantic. As Bob's fame grew, so did his relationships with other women. Rita chose grace over bitterness. She once wrote that she had to train herself to see Bob as a good, loving brother, rather than just a husband. And yet the respect remained. He never allowed any of those women to disrespect me, she remembers. There was an understanding, not of possession, but of presence. Rita would not leave, and emotionally neither would Bob. When Bob was diagnosed with acral lentiginous melanoma in 1977, Rita stayed by his side. She accompanied him to Germany and Miami through alternative treatments, hospital stays, and the omnipresent press. She prepared breakfast not only for Bob, but sometimes also for Bob and Cindy Breakspear, one of his best-known partners at that time. There was pain, of course, but Rita endured, always returning to her conviction that her place was with him as a caregiver, confidant, and spiritual companion. The final days in the transition of a matriarch. Their last days together were quiet and sacred. One of the last gifts Bob received was a ring from Ethiopian royalty, said to contain relics of King Solomon. He wore it until the end. During their last week, Rita washed his hair, spoke to him softly, and surrounded him with music and prayer. She would later describe Bob's death as a fall, the loss of her strength, her man, her first love. But she did not collapse. After his death, Rita became the guardian of his legacy. She took the reins of Tough Gong Studios, managed his estate, and faced numerous legal and personal challenges with silent resilience. Critics doubted her. Family members challenged her. But Rita stood firm, always guided by the conviction that she was not Bob's widow. She remained his partner. She pursued her own musical career, releasing Grammy-nominated albums, and founded the Rita Marley Foundation, which works for poverty reduction and women's empowerment in Jamaica and Ghana. Her activism and philanthropy became an extension of the life she had shared with Bob. Without her, said her son Ziggy, none of this would have happened. My father's career would not be what it is. Today, retired in Miami and surrounded by grandchildren who call her Nana Rita, she remains the backbone of the Marley dynasty. Even in silence, her influence is undeniable. Her voice resonates in the harmonies of the I3s. Her footprint is engraved in the archives of Tough Gong. Her spirit lives in every word of No Woman, No Cry, a free and inspired life, the illusion of perfection and the reality of monogamy. They had built what seemed to be the portrait of a perfect family, filled with music, children, and shared ideals, giving the illusion of an indestructible love. But in reality, monogamy was foreign to Bob Marley's lifestyle and spiritual beliefs. As a devoted Rastafarian, he considered children divine gifts from Yah, and sexual restraint was not a practice he followed. Children are wonderful, Bob said. You don't need many, just a nice girl who doesn't use contraception. This was not a casual remark. It was a philosophy of life. During his lifetime, Bob officially recognized at least 11 children from 7 different women. Some sources even suggest the actual figure could be higher, with rumors of unrecognized children in different parts of the world. His music preached fidelity to truth and spirit. But in love, Bob was scattered. During his marriage to Rita, affairs multiplied. These were not occasional or discrete lapses, but parallel, lasting relationships that often overlapped. Some of these children were born just days apart. In May 1972, he welcomed Robert Marley on the 16th, then Rohan Marley 3 days later on the 19th, each with a different mother. Their births occurred less than a month after the birth of Stephen Marley, Rita's son. This overlap was no accident. It was a reflection of Bob's tireless desire to build a legacy through his children, whatever the emotional cost to Rita, raising a family amidst infidelity and fear. Rita, who was already the mother of a daughter named Sharon from a previous relationship whom Bob adopted, would raise not only her own biological children with Bob, but also several of those he had with other women. She raised Julian, Karen, and Robbie alongside her own children. In No Woman, No Cry, My Life with Bob Marley, Rita confides that she often refused sexual relations with Bob for fear that he was sleeping with other women without protection. Her refusal was not rejection, but fear and exhaustion. As they say, you grit your teeth and hold on, she told BBC Caribbean. That's what I had to do because I was so in love with this man. But the emotional weight was enormous. Rita had to raise children born of infidelity, live with the fact that other women carried her husband's children, and maintain a public facade. She later admitted that jealousy often tormented her, but she never left. They saw their bond as spiritual, designated by God. God made us one, she said. Over time, she saw herself as much more than a wife. She became his protector, his anchor. I became like his sister, his mother and his guardian angel, she once stated, public affairs and the burden of the other women. One of Bob's most public affairs was with Cindy Breakspear, a light-skinned Jamaican beauty who had won the Miss World title in 1976. Their relationship was impossible to hide. It was splashed across the Jamaican press and put even more pressure on an already fragile marriage. Cindy gave birth to Damian Marley, now known as Junior Gong, one of Bob's most famous musical heirs. Cindy remembers the social weight involved in her relationship with a Rastafarian when she came from a privileged background in Kingston. It was a bit scary, she said, but it would change my life forever. And it did. Cindy was not alone. Other women like Janet Hunt, Lucy Pounder, Anita Belnavis, Janet Bowen, and Pat Williams also had children with Bob. Some, like Belnavis, were famous in their own right. She was a table tennis champion. Others remained largely out of the spotlight. What they had in common was having carried the child of an emotionally absent man, often unavailable and shared among several women. They didn't just carry children, they carried the burden of a bond with a man they could never have for themselves alone. Some children were welcomed into the Marley home, others remained apart. One of the most heartbreaking cases was that of Makita Janista Marley, born a few weeks after Bob's death. Her mother, Yvette Crichton, was one of the last women to carry his child. Makita grew up in the United States, far from her half-siblings, cut off from the musical empire and the myth that her father's name had become. The fragmented dynasty and the price of the One Love vision. Despite this chaos, Bob's children followed their own paths. Ziggy, Stephen, and Damien became world-renowned artists. Julian and Kaimani made their names in reggae and hip-hop. Others turned toward business, sports, or private life. But the family dynamic was never simple. Some siblings barely knew each other during their childhood. Some felt closer to Rita than to their own biological mothers. Others struggled to find their place in a family so vast, famous, and fragmented. In public, the Marley brand projected unity, a rainbow coalition of smiling children, musical collaboration, and a common homage. But in private, the fissures persisted. Behind every family photo hid a story of pain, jealousy, and confusion. The world saw one love, but those inside the Marley circle knew the price of that vision. Bob sang of peace, but his love life sowed war in the hearts of his loved ones. And yet they held on. Rita held on. The children, now adults, carry his name with both pride and pain. The world still venerates Bob Marley as a prophet, a musical messiah, a symbol of hope. But behind the icon hid a man full of contradictions, faithful to his music but not to his marriage, devoted to his family but unable to contain it. His life was legendary but not without collateral damage. Even today, the Marley legacy is complex. It is a legacy of love, yes, but also of betrayal, resilience, and emotional survival. They built what looked like a perfect family portrait. What they actually lived was something much more human, imperfect, magnificent, and tragic. The legal storm in the absence of a will. The legal storm after his death. And even in death, he left her heartbroken. When Bob Marley passed away on May 11th, the whole world mourned the loss of a musical prophet. But for Rita Marley, his widow, the pain went far beyond what the public could perceive. Not only was she losing her husband and creative partner, but she also found herself at the heart of a legal and emotional storm that would last for decades. Bob left behind not only a rapidly expanding musical empire, but also no will. What followed was a tangle of betrayal, lawsuits, forged documents, paternity disputes, and warring egos spread across 3 continents, which shook the Marley family to its core. Marley's refusal to draft a will was not an oversight. As a devout Rastafarian, he believed that talking about death constituted a spiritual violation. Drafting a will was, in a way, recognizing the finality of death, whereas for Rastafarians, death is simply a transformation. Thus, when he died in estate, it was Jamaican law that governed his estate, estimated at about $30 million at the time. The law immediately granted 10% of the estate to the widow, 45% to be received during her lifetime, and the rest to be shared equally among the children. Forgery and the battle for control of the estate. But the reality was far from being that simple. Bob Marley had 11 recognized children from 7 different women, and not all were legally recognized at the time of his death. Some children, like Imani Karole, allegedly his first daughter, were never officially recognized by his estate. Others, like Makeda Janesta, were born after his death and grew up far from the Marley family circle. In the absence of clear legal documents or testamentary directives, practically every aspect of Bob's legacy was subject to debate, from the legitimacy of the heirs to the management authority of his image and copyrights. The most explosive revelation occurred shortly after Bob's death. Rita Marley, desperate at the idea of maintaining control over her husband's legacy, allegedly forged his signature on several key legal documents with the help of Bob's lawyer, David Steinberg. These forged papers aimed to transfer valuable publishing rights and commercial shares to her name, but the scheme was quickly discovered. When the fraud was revealed, the Jamaican courts removed Rita from her role as trustee and subjected the entire estate to a complete judicial review. This betrayal shattered trust within the family and cast a lasting shadow over Rita's public image. Claimants, producers, and the fight for musical rights. Meanwhile, other players appeared, former band members, producers, accountants, and distant relatives, each claiming a share of the Marley treasure. Chris Blackwell, the head of Island Records and the man who had propelled Bob onto the international stage, found himself in a delicate position. While some family members accused him of profiting from Bob's legacy for lucrative purposes, others saw him as the only one capable of managing the legal and commercial labyrinth surrounding the catalog and the Marley brand. At the center of all this were the children: Ziggy, Stephen, Cedella, Julian, Rohan, Damien, and others, each having to face not only the loss of their father, but also a divided family. Many had grown up separately in different homes in very varied contexts. The absence of a will forced the family to prove filiation links via sworn statements, and in some cases, DNA tests. Dozens of individuals in Jamaica and the diaspora claimed to be children of Bob Marley. This lack of legal clarity paved the way for opportunists, counterfeit goods, and a series of endless lawsuits over image rights and royalties. There were also the musical rights. Bob Marley's catalog continued to generate millions in revenue each year. Revenue coveted not only by his family, but also by former musicians and producers. Disputes over songwriting credits, publishing shares, and touring rights led to lawsuits in Jamaica, the United Kingdom, and the United States. One of the bitterest lawsuits concerned the sale of Marley's musical catalog. Rita and her children opposed the sale price of $8.2 million, believing it undervalued the true value of Bob's legacy. They took the case to the Privy Council of the United Kingdom and won. But it wasn't the money they were seeking. In a creative solution, Island Records financed a plan allowing each Marley child to receive a payment of $1 million upon reaching their majority, while leaving the family with primary control of the catalog. This was a rare moment of unity in an often divided family. The modern empire and the price of a prophet's silence today. The House of Marley empire is no longer limited to music. It extends to headphones, cannabis, clothing, and eco-friendly products. A large part of the brand is managed by Bob's children, with Ziggy, Cedella, and Stephen as leading figures. But behind the scenes, the wounds of the succession war are still present. Some children remain distant, and some financial arrangements revive tensions. Rita, now over 75 years old, no longer manages the legacy but remains its spiritual matriarch. Despite the betrayals and public scandals, she has always spoken of Bob with respect. In an interview, she stated, "I never saw myself as his widow. I am still his partner." The value of the Marley estate today exceeds $500 million. Bob Marley still appears on the Forbes list of the highest paid deceased celebrities, generating tens of millions each year. But no amount can erase the pain caused by years of conflict, the betrayals, the court battles, the broken family ties. Decades later, the Marley legacy remains haunted by the price of a man who refused to write a will. Thus, the story of Bob Marley's fortune is not just about music or money. It is a warning, a portrait of what happens when faith collides with the law, when love is tested by legacy, and when a man's death becomes a battlefield for those he left behind. In the end, Bob Marley didn't just leave a message of peace, he left a storm. For years, the world saw Bob Marley as a prophet of peace, A revolutionary, a musical messiah. But behind the anthems and the legend, there was a silent, constant, scarred woman. Rita Marley has finally lifted the veil, and what she revealed was not just painful, it was deeply human. And now it's your turn to answer. Was Bob Marley's refusal to commit to a single woman a sacred conviction or simply a clever excuse to justify his excesses? Tell us what you think in the comments. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because behind every icon, there is often a truth that we never took the time to question until today. Final call to action. If this story changed the way you view the legends of the past and the sacrifices made in the shadows, please subscribe to our channel and like this video. We are unearthing the history they tried to bury. Let's plant the seeds for a deeper understanding of the truth. The next treasure from the archives will be revealed soon.